Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. We love getting your feedback and requests, and this one's been coming up a lot lately.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of our listeners are really intrigued by this whole online porn thing.
It's definitely everywhere, but is it really shaping how we see sex and relationships?
That's the big question, isn't it? And we've got some clips here from a Louise Perry video that really get to the heart of it.
Okay, yeah, Perry's work is pretty thought-provoking.
For sure, she's tackling a topic that a lot of people find uncomfortable, but it's something we can't really ignore, can we? I mean, it's everywhere.
Yeah, even if you don't watch it yourself, it's definitely part of the cultural landscape.
It kind of reminds me of that saying, you don't have to be a smoker to be affected by secondhand smoke.
I get it, but haven't people always been interested in erotic stuff?
Oh, absolutely. Think about those like Pompeii murals or even Victorian erotica.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
what makes online porn so different? Well, Perry makes a really important distinction. You see, those historical examples were limited in their reach and often had different cultural meanings. They weren't just about instant gratification.
Great.
But now we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry that can basically beam the most extreme content directly to anyone with a smartphone. And that includes kids,
Kids, seriously.
as young as 10 years old, according to Perry.
Wow, that's pretty disturbing.
It is. And it makes her point about sexual disenchantment even more alarming.
Sexual disenchantment, what does that even mean?
It's this idea that when we see sex as purely physical, stripped of any moral or emotional context, it can lead to some pretty harmful consequences.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see where she's going with this.
It's like we've lost a sense of the sacred or the mystery surrounding sex,
Hmm.
and it becomes just another commodity to be consumed.
And that's where her analogy of online porn being the McDonald's of sex really hits home for me.
Exactly. It might seem kind of simplistic,
Mm.
but it really captures how the industry operates.
It's all about instant gratification, isn't it? Just like craving that salty, greasy burger.
And Perry has a term for this. She calls it limbic capitalism.
Limbic capitalism.
Yeah, it's this idea that companies are making profits by tapping into our most basic desires, even when it's potentially harmful.
So, like the gambling industry, fast food, even social media.
All of them are playing on that same drive for instant gratification.
And in the world of porn, one of the most disturbing examples that Perry highlights is the rise of strangulation porn.
Right, and she cites a statistic from the UK that's pretty shocking. Over half of women aged 18 to 25 have been choked by a partner during sex.
Wow, that's a pretty stark reminder of how online trends can spill over into real life relationships.
Exactly, and it makes you wonder how something that's so easily accessible online can influence what people consider normal in their own sexual experiences.
And that ties into Perry's concept of sexual imprinting, right?
Absolutely. She's concerned that these highly stylized and often extreme depictions of sex are shaping expectations and desires, especially for younger viewers who are still figuring things out.
It's like their brains are being imprinted with these distorted images.
And it's important to remember that these platforms are designed to keep people hooked. They're not exactly prioritizing user well-being.
So where does that leave us? If the industry is profiting by exploiting our vulnerabilities and these unrealistic portrayals of sex are potentially harming our relationships and self-image, what can we do about it?
Well, Perry argues for regulation. She believes the online porn industry should be treated like other potentially harmful industries like big tobacco or gambling.
Regulation? Huh. That sounds pretty drastic, but I guess when you consider the potential harms, it makes you wonder if it's time to start taking this issue more seriously.
Exactly. Perry's not calling for censorship, but she's urging us to at least consider whether some level of intervention is necessary to protect individuals and society from the potentially negative consequences of this technology.
I'm starting to see why her work is causing such a stir. She's not afraid to challenge our assumptions and make us confront some uncomfortable truths.
And that's what makes this conversation so important. It's not about judging or shaming anyone. It's about acknowledging the complexities of this issue and having an open and honest dialogue about how technology is impacting our lives for better or for worse.
Right. And speaking of complexities, Perry also takes aim at platforms like OnlyFans, which are often touted as more ethical alternatives to traditional porn sites.
Yeah, they're often presented as empowering for sex workers, giving them more control and autonomy, but Perry isn't convinced.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Why does she see OnlyFans differently? It seems like creators have more freedom and can set their own boundaries.
That's the surface level view. Carey argues that while these platforms might offer some advantages, they're still fundamentally built on the commodification of sex. And She makes a provocative comparison, calling them digital pimps.
Digital pimps. Now, that's a term that's sure to get people talking, so what does she mean by that?
Well, she's suggesting that while OnlyFans might cut out the traditional middleman, the platform itself becomes a new kind of exploitative force. They're still profiting off the exchange of sexual content, and the creators, while they have more agency, are still subject to the platform's rules and algorithms.
So even in this supposedly more ethical space, there are still ethical dilemmas to grapple with. It seems like with technology, things are rarely as simple as they appear.
You got it. And Perry's work forces us to look beyond the surface and ask some tough questions about who's really benefiting from these platforms and what the long-term consequences might be.
It's a lot to think about. But before we delve deeper into the complexities of OnlyFans and the ethical debate surrounding it, let's pause here for a moment. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our dive, exploring Perry's ideas about sexual disenchantment, limbic capitalism, and the impact of online porn on our sexual norms and behaviors. What are your initial thoughts, listener? What's resonating with you so far?
Yeah, it's a lot to process, isn't it? We've gone from ancient Roman art to digital pimps in just a few minutes.
It really makes you think about how quickly things change with technology. But about those digital pimps, do you think Perry's being a little too harsh on OnlyFans? I mean, isn't it a good thing that sex workers have more control over their content and what they earn?
It's a good question. And Perry does acknowledge there could be some benefits. But she also warns us about falling for what she calls the myth of the empowered sex worker.
The myth of the empowered sex worker.
Yeah, basically she's saying that even with more autonomy, these individuals are still part of a system that puts a price tag on their bodies and often exploits them.
I see what you mean. Like, even if you're running your own OnlyFans page, you're still playing by the rules of a game that's designed to make money from sex.
Yeah, exactly. And we have to think about the bigger picture, too. Does making it normal to sell explicit content online make us think about sex and relationships in a healthier way? Or does it just blur the lines even more between intimacy and business?
That's a really good question, and it's something I think our listener might want to think about too. How do you feel about platforms like OnlyFans and how they're changing our culture?
It's definitely a conversation we need to be having. And Perry's work gives us a good starting point to unpack these really complicated issues. Now, going back to that whole regulation thing, I know it can sound a bit extreme, especially when we talk about the internet, which is all about freedom and access.
Yeah, it almost feels like you can't really control what people see and do online. Where would you even start?
Perry says it's definitely a challenge, but not impossible. We've managed to regulate other industries that can be harmful, like tobacco or gambling. She thinks we can learn from those examples.
So what would regulation actually look like for online porn? Would it be like age verification, stricter rules about what kind of content is allowed, or something totally different?
Those are all possibilities. Age verification seems like the most obvious place to start. Make it harder for kids to access this stuff. But there are also questions about how these platforms are designed.
Yeah.
And if they could be structured in a way that does less harm.
Like maybe not auto-playing the most extreme videos or giving users more control over what they see. Kind of like how some social media platforms are letting you tweak your algorithms.
Exactly. It's about shifting the focus away from just getting people hooked and making as much money as possible and thinking more about the well-being of the users.
But wouldn't that stifle creativity and innovation? I mean, one of the things that makes the internet so cool is that it pushes boundaries and challenges norms.
I hear Perry gets that there's this tension between freedom of expression and protecting people and society from harm. But she also says that freedom doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want with no consequences.
True. We have rules and regulations for a reason. The question is, are the potential dangers of online porn serious enough to justify stepping in and doing something about it?
It's a discussion we need to have. And it's not just about protecting individuals either. It's about protecting society as a whole from the potential downsides of a culture that's increasingly bombarded with extreme and often exploitative sexual images.
It's a lot to take in. It almost feels overwhelming. Like, where do we even start to address this issue?
I think the first step is awareness. Realizing this is a complicated issue with no easy answers and being open to having honest conversations about the good and bad sides of online pornography.
Yeah, because pretending it doesn't exist or that it doesn't have a real impact on our culture doesn't help anyone.
Exactly. We need to talk about this stuff in a smart and thoughtful way without just trying to shut it down or freaking out.
And maybe that starts with each of us looking at our own relationship with online porn and how it might be shaping what we believe and how we act.
It's all about asking those tough questions like, what am I watching? Why am I watching it? And is it actually helping me create a healthier, more balanced view of sex?
Those are some great points. And before we move on, I wanted to touch again on something Perry said that really hit me. This whole idea that online porn might be warping our sense of what's normal in sexual
Oh,
relationships.
that's a huge point, especially for younger generations who are basically growing up surrounded by this stuff. Perry's worried that these super stylized, often really extreme portrayals of sex they're seeing online are going to mess with their expectations and what they want in potentially bad ways.
It's almost like they're being trained to see sex through this very limited lens, where it's all about performance and aggression and unrealistic body types.
And that can definitely spill over into their real life relationships.
Yeah.
They might have trouble connecting with their partners emotionally, or they might struggle with body image issues, or have unrealistic ideas about what sex should be like.
It's like they're being told that intimacy is all about putting on a show and getting off instead of about connection and being vulnerable.
You got it. And that's a recipe for feeling let down and unsatisfied. We have to remember that the sex we see online is often very different from the sex we experience in real life.
And that's where being able to communicate openly comes in.
Right.
Talking to your partner about what you want, what you're scared of, what feels good and what doesn't.
For sure. Good communication is the key to any healthy relationship, especially when it comes to sex. It's about creating a space where you can be honest and open with each other without judgment or pressure.
And that's something we can all work on no matter how old we are or what our experiences have been. It's about being aware of the messages we're taking in from all the media we consume and making conscious choices about how we want to experience intimacy and connection in our own lives.
It's a journey, not a finish line. And Perry's work gives us some great insights and tools to help us navigate all of this.
Absolutely. So to our listener, we hope this deep dive has given you some things to think about. We've explored the history of erotic art, the rise of online porn, the ethical questions around platforms like OnlyFans, and how all of this might be affecting the way we understand sex and relationships, both individually and as a society. What stands out to you as the most important? What are you taking away from this conversation?
Yeah, it's like she's saying this isn't just some theoretical debate. This is real life.
It is, and Perry makes the point that we can't just brush it off as a personal choice. The scale of this whole online porn thing and how it might be changing what we see as normal sexually. It means we have to look at it as a society.
Right. And it's not about censorship or anything. It's more about being smarter and more informed about the potential good and bad that comes with this technology.
Exactly. And that conversation needs to include everyone. Researchers, educators, people making policies, parents, and young people too. It shouldn't just be adults telling young people what to think it should be about, giving them the space to explore these issues and figure out their own views. I really like that giving young people a voice in this. It's not about cutting off access or forcing our morals on them. It's about giving them the tools to think critically about all this and make choices that align with their own values and well-being.
And giving them good information about sex and relationships from sources that aren't just trying to make a profit or exploit them.
Yeah, one thing that really stood out to me in Perry's work is how she focuses on the money-making side of online porn. It's easy to forget that behind all those images and videos, there's a whole system designed to keep us hooked and coming back for more.
It's like she's showing us what's really going on behind the scenes. And once you see how it all works, it's hard to just sit back and watch without thinking about what it's doing to our minds.
So for our listener who's been with us on this deep dive, what are some key things they can take away and apply to their own lives? What questions should they ask themselves as they try to make sense of all this?
Well, I think the most important thing is to be aware of what you're watching. Why are you watching it? And how does it make you feel?
Yeah. It's like that whole media literacy thing, right? Being able to really analyze the messages you're being bombarded with.
Right. And to be aware of how it might be affecting your self-image, your relationships, your overall well-being.
And if something feels wrong or just doesn't sit right with you, don't be afraid to step back and question it or talk to someone you trust.
Definitely. And it's good to remember that you're not alone. This conversation is happening everywhere as people figure out what this technology means for us.
And the more we talk about it openly and honestly, the better chance we have of creating a culture where sexuality is expressed in ways that are healthy, respectful, and empowering for everyone.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one last thought. If we all agree that we need to regulate industries that take advantage of us and could hurt us, like the tobacco industry, the gambling industry, the fast food industry, shouldn't we be looking at the online porn industry the same way?
That's a really good question. And there aren't any easy answers, but it's definitely a conversation we need to have as a society.
And that's what makes the deep dive so important. It's not about giving you all the answers. It's about making you think sparking conversations, and helping you make your own informed choices about how you interact with the world.
Absolutely. So to our listener, keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep the conversation going. And remember, you're not alone in this